Welcome to The Point. I'm Marcia Kramer. We'll get right to the point with former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg's debut in the Democratic presidential debate, which was not exactly his finest hour. He took heat from all the other candidates. But first, let's hear from someone who wants the job Mayor Mike held for 12 years. Loree Sutton. She threw her hat into the race back in November. She's a brigadier general who served in the U.S. Army for 30 years. Sutton is the founding commissioner for Veteran Services under Mayor de Blasio, and now she wants to fill the old boss's shoes. Let's get right to the point of view from General Loree Sutton. Thank you so much for being here and for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Marcia.
So look at this. Your former boss says he wants to save the city. It's right here in his blueprint. What I want to know is, who does he want to save the city from?
Well, not only save the city from, but save the city for. And it's a little curious, the timing, 6 years in, but as I listened to the mayor, it seemed to me that he was sort of putting out these sort of looming, scary boogeymen who are, you know, fueled by greed and wanting to tear apart life for everyday New Yorkers. And I reject that. I completely reject that. I know that the reason I got into this race is I wanted to save our city's soul. True greatness starts right here in our hearts that beat for freedom, that beat for good jobs, that beat for clean streets, that beat for safety, that beat for treatment for our mentally ill, that beat for housing that's affordable. That's what truly makes us great, and I'm all for it. If the mayor wants to start in now at 6 years in, you know, I've got nothing but energy and leadership and proven experience to bring to the table.
So he does want to save the city from some people. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Sure.
It's not that we have to fear street thugs, it's that we have to fear bad landlords.
So, Loree, is he right? Do we not have to fear street thugs and we have to fear greedy landlords?
Listen, I talk to New Yorkers all the time. I talk to moms who are afraid to take their kids down the street. They don't feel safe. You go into any subway. I recently wrote an op-ed that talked about mental illness and the experience with homelessness. But this whole notion that the way forward is to demonize people, or in this case, an entire industry, I reject it.
So we have to ask the question then, if he wants to save the city, he's been the boss for the last 6 years, and he's trying to save it from himself?
You know, I guess you'd have to ask him that question, but what I would say is, as I have served in this city, and by the way, I am so grateful to the mayor for investing in my leadership and giving me the chance to lead a startup in New York City government, to be the first city in the country to start up a municipal agency dedicated to veterans. But I will say this, that as I watch the quality of life in our city, the city that has embraced me and my sweetie Loree and now my wife and our little dachshund, little Moxie, we love our city. And as I saw things continue to deteriorate, I kept looking around saying, where is the inclusive, common sense, proven leadership that can bring our city together and truly get us where we need to be? I think every New Yorker feels the need for that. My campaign is all about providing a different kind of leadership.
Well, that sounds like a criticism of your former boss. You're saying, where is the inclusive leadership?
Well, I think that certainly there were things that we agreed on over these last 5 years in his administration. How can you argue with pre-K for all? How can you argue with being right on stop and frisk? How can you argue with investing in veterans? But I will say this, that there are, perhaps the best way to put it is, our leadership style is very, very different. Now, Marcia.
How is it different?
You know, I learned everything I needed to know about leadership starting out in basic training in 1981. One of the first things we were taught is that a leader is responsible. I am responsible for everything that my team does or fails to do. So that's all about accountability. In a Sutton administration, if something goes wrong, if you or one of your colleagues in journalism point out that something's not going right, it's right here. hold me accountable, and then you bet we're going to fix whatever it is. But that's the first start. Secondly, relationships. I think that to demonize industries, to treat the media and journalism with disrespect, with arrogance, the relationship, of course, we've seen between the mayor and the governor. They collaborated on one issue in the last 6 years. It was Amazon. We saw how that went. Yes. And so I think that there are a number of ways in which people that I talk to in New York, they're hungry for a different kind of leadership, an energy that listens to all voices, learns from those voices, and then says, okay, here's where we're going, and hold me accountable.
So what was Mayor de Blasio's biggest success?
Well, certainly from my perspective, his investment in veterans. And I will tell you, I'd like to just tell you a little bit more about that story, Marcia, because when I came on board 5 years ago,
nothing.
You know, Mayor Koch, he had started up the Mayor's Office of Veterans Affairs back in the 80s, but never more than a handful of folks, great leaders, great folks working their hearts out. But then there was this convergence of leadership. It was the mayor, it was the speaker, it was the community, the veterans advocates here that said, no, we want the respect that we deserve. And the mayor provided that, that respect.
So what was his biggest failure?
I think I would say, rather than a failure of a single initiative, the thing that I've been most disappointed about is the failure to pay attention to the details of operations, of management, of, you know, in my world.
So he's a bad manager?
He's just not particularly interested in those details. And so, you know, time after time within this administration, a lot of effort's gone into the politics and into the press release, but then comes the mad scramble to put together the program. It needs to be exactly the opposite. So operations is a sacred word in my world, and that's what the next mayor needs to bring.
So are you saying that sometimes programs fell through the cracks, for example, like homeless?
We're seeing that now. We're seeing, you know, the issues in NYC with the boilers and the water and the lead and the issues in the subway, the issues with the seriously mentally ill. And yes, you'll ask me about the Thrive program, and I will say that there is much that needs to be done with that program, and I, as mayor, am uniquely qualified to lead that charge.
You know, many people think that his failure to deal with the homeless was his biggest failure because, you know, numbers of homeless have increased exponentially during his reign, even though he's had, you know, numerous opportunities to unveil the latest and the newest and the brightest program, which never seemed to do the trick. I wonder what your take on that is.
Well, you know, I think that is a fair criticism. I think it's a tough argument to make. When I first came on board, you know, we're still relatively close to the financial meltdown. Folks were saying, well, the economy's so bad, no wonder it's going up. Well, the economy's been going pretty well here for the last few years. I think it boils down to relationships and details and operations. You see, for example—
So he doesn't follow through?
I think the follow-through is where so much depends upon sustainable programs that really deliver the outcomes that they're supposed to deliver. I mean, otherwise, you know, you've just got an idea or a concept or a press release, but to have a sustainable program, you need to have folks who have done big things before and who do care about the details and will follow up and hold the entire system accountable. I think that's what folks are hungry for.
So let's talk about affordable housing. What do you consider to be affordable housing, and what should the city do to develop it?
Sure. Well, I think first of all, you have to start by bringing in bringing in the folks who actually build the affordable housing. But it's an all-out.
So does that mean you have to bring in the landlords, the greedy landlords that Bill de Blasio wants to run against?
There are bad actors in every single industry. In my field of medicine, in journalism, in real estate, no doubt. But I want to challenge the real estate industry. Come together, let's sit around the table, and let's figure this out. It's not just housing for folks at one end of the spectrum, it's making New York City affordable for all of us. And that requires relationships and public-private partnerships. It requires respect Marcia, I want to bring back respect to the city I love that has become my home.
So the city council says that one way to deal with the homeless would be to increase the cash assistance in the form of housing vouchers so that they can get money to afford market rent properties. I wonder how you come down on that proposal.
Well, you know, I certainly understand the impetus, the impulse to provide more subsidies, but I think really we've provided a lot of subsidies over these last several years. The problem keeps getting worse. I think one of the underlying problems is, you know, we haven't been able to build affordable housing in zones that actually could sustain that housing, the business case, without subsidies. And that's hugely important. So this is an all of the above strategy. For example, you know, today, one city council member can nix an entire rezoning proposal. What's that about? Let's change that so that we can really look at the entire city as a city for all New Yorkers. And that's what I think the answer has to be. And that requires partnerships.
So I'd like to switch to mental health, which I know is an area of your expertise. What should the city be doing, first of all, with mental health issues with the homeless, and then we'll go to other issues?
Sure. I think, first of all, Marcia, it's important to understand that there's a whole spectrum. So there's mental health on this side of the spectrum and mental illness. And it's important to have a strategy that encompasses the entire spectrum.
Do we need more mental health beds, more psychiatric hospitals?
We do. So, you know, I'm sure you've seen the increase in the suffering that is evident everywhere you go in this city now, the drug use, the serious mental illness. Well, what's happened in the last several years? With the best of intentions, we've decarcerated thousands of folks from Rikers. No planning was made for the 40% of them that have serious mental illness, at the same time that the governor has been decreasing hospital beds. So yes, we need an all-of-the-above strategy that really relies on the strengths and the resources that we have at every single level.
You know, in an op-ed piece you wrote recently, you said that we needed to create a path for civil involuntary confinement.
Yes.
Not as a way of punishing people, but as a way of actually getting them the help that they need. Could you talk about that?
Sure. When you talk with folks, family members, people who have lived experience with mental illness, one of the things that's so vexing is that the current civil involuntary commitment law requires imminent danger. And we saw how this played out with the individual in Brooklyn who, you know, their family member had been so worried about them, called the team to evaluate them. They said, well, you know, he's not in imminent danger right now. If if things get worse, call 911. Well, we have to be able to change that law so that the judge can look at the entire pattern of risky behavior, understanding that serious mental illness, it can prevent those who are suffering the most from fully comprehending the risk that they present to themselves and to others.
So as a trained psychiatrist, how do you evaluate the Thrive program?
You know, I think, you know, the Thrive program has broken a lot of ground on a lot of levels. And I think it was a courageous effort to really get this topic out there and to talk about. I think, you know, the operations, you know.
What about the execution?
The operations and execution, I think that's where we lost some time, a lot of time.
Why?
You know, there was not the attention paid to the operational challenges of doing something on that scale and communicating about it. Because, you know, the city already had a lot of investment in mental health and mental illness, but there were gaps, and the Thrive program purported to fill those gaps.
So are you saying basically that the First Lady suffers from the same disease as the mayor of the city of New York, a lack of attention to detail in operations?
I think, you know, one does not have to be an expert in operations to ensure sustainable programs. I think that the First Lady showed a lot of courage in starting this program, and I think now, under the current leadership, I think we will see lots of improvement and transparency and outcomes that Susan Herman and her team are now really working to achieve. So I'm optimistic about Thrive.
So let's switch topics a little bit. You know, you're running against a number of people, including Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams, who's a former NYPD captain, who seems to be leading as a campaign that's going to be fixing law and order. There's been a problem in how the police unions regard the mayor of the city of New York. Here's what police unions have been saying about Bill de Blasio. Let's listen.
It's not too late to stand on that soapbox and say, my words against police officers did damage. My words got in the heads of criminals on the street who thought they were safe enough to try to kill police officers.
So there's two questions. Number one, do you believe that Bill de Blasio's words hurt relations with the police and the community? And secondly, how would you improve relations between police and community to make it a better operating environment?
Absolutely. This comes back again to both relationships. I talk to cops all over the street to really get a sense at the beat level, what's going on, what are their concerns. They feel utterly disrespected by the elected leadership in this city. They feel disrespected by fellow New Yorkers. They feel like their families are at risk with the bail reform. And
is it the mayor that sets the tone?
And the mayor sets the tone in the city, no question. And so in fact, just this week, I had a meeting with Ed Mullins with the Sergeants Benevolent Association. I've got a meeting coming up with Mr. Lynch, and I look forward to both listening, learning, and understanding. How can we hold each other accountable? NYPD, best law enforcement organization on earth. And we're in a challenge right now where restoring trust and bringing back respect is so important. And I will tell you, on the day, Martin Luther King's Day, when Eric Adams was over talking about how folks should go back to Ohio and to Iowa, I was at the community center, NYPD's community center in East Brooklyn with Jumaane Williams, who took on the drum major's instinct. He recited Martin Luther King's, one of his last sermons, and we had the most diverse audience there. Theater of War Productions, I've worked with Brian Dories for these last 12 years. This is the kind of engagement, the engagement that came through that discussion and through Jumaane Williams' masterful rendition of this sermon. And I don't know if you know the sermon, Marcia, but the sermon talks about how all of us as human beings, we have the drum major's instinct to be out in front, to be all about me and all the rest. But you know what? He challenged us to become drum majors for love, for compassion, for justice. And so as I look at our city, I want to become a drum major to take care of those rats, to build the housing, to provide the affordable education and career training, and to invest in our young people. I'm excited about all of that. That's what I want to be.
Loree Sutton wants to be the next mayor, the drum major for the city of New York, and we'll have you back real soon.